Mic check. So, good morning, everyone. It's the February meeting. We'll start the business. We'll start the business of this meeting by voting on the draft January 8th, 2019 board minutes, which the board members have received and are posted on our website. Someone make a motion to approve the minutes? Is there a second? Thank you. Any issues, any requested changes, amendments, revisions? No? Okay, let's go for a vote. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is the election of a vice chair. Board of Correction bylaws require vice chair election at each January meeting. As I was not able to attend last month's meeting, we moved the election to today. The vice chair will serve for a term of just under 1 year, beginning today and ending on January 31st, 2019. Is there someone who would want to nominate a candidate for vice chair?
Chair, I'd like to nominate candidate for the vice chair. I'd like to nominate Stanley Richards, a colleague. He actually is a friend of mine for more than 25 years. You know him. I have a long page of his accomplishments, which are significant. He is the executive vice president of the Fortune Society, which plays a critical role in New York City, and he has been there as the organization has doubled and tripled in size and become more and more complex and played a more and more important role in New York City. And in addition to that, he serves on multiple boards, and he's an essential part of the effort to reframe jails in New York City and create something in this city that we will all be able to point to with pride going forward. Working with him on this board has been an honor, and I would just like to place his name in nomination for that year.
Thank you very much. Is there a second? Second. Multiple seconds. Very good. Thank you. Shall we have any debate on this, or is this... Great. I think sounds like it's unanimous, but we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Reagan is not here. Mr. Perino? Yeah, no, he's out. Ms. Sherman? Yes. Dr. Safir? Yes. I take it you'll... Okay. Judge Hamill? Dr. Cohen? Yes. Yeah. Ms. Jones-Austin? Yes. Thank you very much. I am certainly in favor of it. Congratulations. Okay. Very great and esteemed member of the board. So, congratulations, Stanley. Okay, let me find my place in the... So, we have now public comment on the variance request. The board has 2 variance votes scheduled for today. DOC has requested a variance to allow them to continue to house young adults aged 19 to 21 in commingled housing with adults. The department has also requested a variance renewal to allow them to house young adults 18 to 21 years old in ESH, Enhanced Supervised Housing. Because of the variances, we have a public comment now, and at the end of and we'll have another public comment at the end of the meeting. We ask that speakers limit their comments during this period to the variance request itself, and they'll limit them to 3 minutes. We'll have, as I said, we've had an additional public comment period at the end of the meeting on all the various matters that were discussed today. Okay, so the speakers are, the first is Albert Craig of COBA.
Good morning. Well, we oppose the commingling of inmates And the reason why is because this department has shown no ability to create any safe environment for inmates. Furthermore, over the last 2 months, with this thing that they came up with, pardon me, blending, right, which is breaking up these gang-affiliated houses and forcing these people into these housing areas, gang members, into these housing, slashings, stabbings. So how can we trust them to institute any kind of program that's going to have anything to do with safety? I'm going to say it again, they failed miserably. In fact, the whole notion that they house them according to gang affiliation, and now they got this thing called blending, which they have no policy for, but they send in emails to one another about them that break up these housing areas and throwing these people in there. And I've spoke to some of you people here. There's a list of inmates who've been hurt because of this. All of these inmate advocacy groups that say they care about inmates, they've thrown these inmates into these areas that have gotten slashed and stabbed because of it. So how can we trust them? The whole notion of putting inmates into an area, right? Young inmates now, that whole thing about they being able to turn a young guy around, the gang population is far too high, right? They breaking up these houses, and I got to say that you really have to understand what's happening. They don't have any written policy on this thing they came up with called blending. They are forcing these people into these housing areas, which is leading to injuries to them, as well as putting officers in danger. They should not be trusted to do this. I know you're going to probably approve it because this is what, to be honest with you, my experience is you're coming with preconceived notions. But you need to look at that. You need to delay it, and you need to look at how they're forcing. Ask them about blending, how they're going about it. We sent them some ideas of how they could make it safer to break these gang housing, and they totally ignore it, like they ignore all our suggestions. And they're being ran by people who don't know anything about jail. And now, being that Mr. Cohen agreed with me that they were housing according to gang affiliation, they're throwing them and dumping them into these housing, which is leading to injuries. And I suggest some of you who say you care about inmates, really, really look into this. Thank you very much.
No, he's not here? Okay, the next speaker is Danielle Gerard, Children's Rights.
Good morning. My name's Danielle Gerard. I'm a staff attorney with Children's Rights. I refer the board to our written testimony. Our overriding issue concerning the variances and the young adult plan are that we cannot determine if the department has benchmarks that indicate success or how long it will take to implement the young adult plan as initially designed. First, the variances and the update lack specific uniform processes regarding admission to Rikers. It is unclear how the case-by-case determinations the department refers to are made. We believe housing decisions must be made based on a set protocol or evidence-based tool and not left to the individual determinations of intake staff. Second, there is no benchmark for the percentage of young adults the department will keep in YA-only housing. The board's July variance required the department to develop a plan to house substantially all YAs in YA housing, but in the update, the department concedes that substantially all means no less than 50%. Although the department is to be commended for increasing the number of young adult males in pure YA housing units from 52 to 67%, a third of young adults at Rikers remain in adult units with no discernible plan to move them or create more YA-only housing. Third, the update maintains that the department offers 5 hours of programming in the majority of GP housing areas. Is this majority also limited to no less than 50%? Providing age-appropriate programming is critical for all YAs. Providing it in half of GP housing areas where YAs reside is simply not sufficient. In addition, it is not clear if 19 to 21-year-olds have access to the same programming offered to 18-year-olds, or if there are enough slots available to every young adult who wants to participate. Do YAs get put on a waiting list? Furthermore, the department does not provide programming data specific to the 18-year-olds at RNDC. Fourth, the update mentions only that the department installed additional DOE posts in GRVC's main school. This does not address educational opportunities for YAs housed in the other general population units. The department does not indicate how many YAs are placed in facilities without access to DOE services, or how long transfers based on education access issues typically take. In addition, the department does not state how many young adults are currently housed in Success House placements. Fifth, the department does not indicate the percentage of young adult staff that have received trainings, how often training is or should be repeated, or the target date by which all young adult staff will have received all the trainings. It seems several trainings have not been provided since 2016. We urge the board to require the department to set specific benchmarks and timelines for meeting the goals of the young adult plan, including ending the use of ESH, restraint desks, and commingling. Otherwise, we fear that continued variance requests, like the ones before you today, will constitute the actual implementation or lack thereof of the young adult plan. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So is this where I now? So the whole thing now?
Yeah, I mean, this is a note that the variance was not requested. You could
Start with this. So the next item we're going to discuss today is the sharing of patient health and injury information. It's an important initial note. In the past month, CHS decided not to seek the same variance it had sought for 5 years regarding minimum standard 3-08 small c 3. They decided not to seek this variance today based upon a new legal interpretation of the board standard, which is an interpretation that this board disagrees with and which we'll discuss later today. At last month's public meeting, the New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation's Correctional Health Services Division, or CHS, requested renewal of a longstanding variance from healthcare minimum standards 3-08C3, which prohibits healthcare staff from sharing with DOC specific diagnoses of people in custody. The variance permits CHS to provide the department with specific diagnoses related only to injuries sustained by persons while in correctional custody. The reporting of diagnoses unrelated to an injury remains prohibited. The board indicated it would consider proposed conditions to the variation at today's meeting. The unusually short duration of the variance from last month was to give the board and CHS time to discuss the conditions, which CHS opposed and continues to oppose. Therefore, CHS decided, based upon Corporation Counsel opinion, not to seek further renewal of the variance. This impasse between the board and CHS has put us in a place today where the very authority of the board's minimum standards are in question and patient confidentiality is at risk. Before this public, the board's minimum standard was passed in 1991 and prohibits CHS from sharing patient diagnosis with the Department of Correction. The standard strikes a careful balance between protecting the right to privacy of an incarcerated person and protecting the health and safety of that person and of others. This balance is ensured by a regulatory framework that specifies the circumstances under which a person's health information may or may not be disclosed to the Department of Correction or parties outside the jail system. It also explicitly prohibits the sharing of patient diagnoses for any reason. This standard was modeled on the American Correctional Association and American Medical Association standards, which emphasize the importance of patient privacy and confidentiality in ensuring quality health care. The standard also went through multiple rounds of edits and public debate, receiving comments from many parts of the government, as well as the Legal Aid Prisoners' Rights Project and the ACLU's National Prison Project. In November 2013, CHS requested a variance that would allow it to provide the department with specific diagnoses related only to injuries sustained by people while in custody. CHS argued that this information was necessary for DOC to conduct meaningful investigations of incidents resulting in injuries and to utilize its investigative findings to prevent future injuries. Informed by public debate, the board agreed and has granted this variance every 6 months for the past 5 years. In granting the variance, we find that, like the underlying minimum standards, the variance strikes a careful balance between protecting the confidentiality of health information of people in custody by limiting such disclosure only to injuries sustained while in DOC custody. The board finds that any resulting harms to patient privacy can be minimized with proper oversight. Now we fast forward 5.5 years later. Last month, the board staff released a report regarding the reporting and prevention of serious injuries in the jails. The study uncovered significant deficiencies in the reporting of serious injuries by the department and by CHS. Thus, the board proposed conditions to ensure that the agency's implementation of the variance met the variance's stated goals and allowed for the board to monitor compliance. In what appears to be an attempt to avoid the board's oversight on this important issue, CHS now relies on a legal opinion which says that the variance is unnecessary. This opinion is based on an interpretation of the underlying rule with which the board disagrees and was arrived at without consulting or obtaining input from the board. We are not aware of any legal basis for this usurpation of the board's rulemaking authority and the public's opportunity to engage in rulemaking via the CAPA process. Reversing 28 years of shared understanding of the minimum standards, plain meaning and intent, it appears now that CHS believes that it can routinely share patient diagnoses without the board's independent oversight. For the last 28 years, patients in custody could expect CHS to maintain the confidentiality of sensitive health diagnoses. Today, to avoid independent oversight, CHS has put this central tenet of quality medical care in doubt. Last Friday, when we received the law department's opinion, we urged CHS to seek a renewal of the variance at the February board meeting to allow all parties to engage in a deliberate and transparent review of the meaning of the rule, its meaning, and the board's ability to enforce it. We urge that only through such a process would the integrity of the minimum standards and the city's CAPA process be preserved. Unfortunately, CHS has not requested a variance renewal in an effort to avoid the board's conditions, and thus the variance will expire at the end of today. The variance that was approved at the January meeting will expire at the end of the day today. At this point, we believe that any sharing of patient diagnosis will be prohibited by our health care standard, our minimum standard. This is not the board's intent. We believe that there is a legitimate need for the injury information sharing, but it must be done legally and with proper protections and oversight in place. In addition, the board has agreed to rulemaking under CAPA in order to codify these efforts. We will continue to engage our city partners on this critical issue, and we welcome any public comment on this issue today or in the coming weeks. We'll discuss this issue again at our March public meeting, but now we invite CHS to provide us with any insight or guidance they might have on this issue.
Hi, Patsy Yang, Senior Vice President for Correctional Health Services. I'm going to defer to the law department.
Good morning.
All right.
As we've discussed offline with several of the stakeholders here, the law department is interested, as you pointed out, Mr. Cephas, that discussions are ongoing. It was as a result of our advice that we asked CHS to not submit the request for the variance. We will engage all the stakeholders in the appropriate time, in the appropriate form, but giving out legal advice, as anyone could understand, would not be the appropriate thing to do at this point in this forum to the 3 agency partners we have, and of course with the administration as responsibilities that we have.
I'm sorry, what's your name?
Oh, sorry. Thomas Giovanni. I'm Chief of Staff at the Law Department.
Dr. Cohen?
Yes, I'm asking for legal advice. Tell us why you started this. I mean, this is a critical issue in jail health care. Violence is not something that you can try to obscure. The amount of violence is not something that the law department should make an effort to obscure. It's a major cause of health problems in jails. People are injured. They're injured by use of force. They claim they're injured by slipping and falling, but it's actually use of force. And the investigation of this is critical function, and it has to be done with full respect for patient confidentiality. This has been going on for years, for decades in New York City. Why is the law department deciding that this is not something that should be done anymore?
The substance of your question is our legal advice. That we are willing to discuss it, will discuss it in the appropriate forums.
I mean, you send us a public letter. We responded with a public letter. This is the forum where we discuss the Board of Correction activity. You're saying you are not giving advice. You are setting in motion a dangerous program here, and I'd like to know why you are. You can not tell me the advice you're giving, but why are you doing this?
Honestly, the substance of your question is the legal advice that the Corporation Counsel has given, and the letter is simply the result of that advice.
Go ahead, Stanley.
Stanley?
So could you tell us what changed since 2013? We've been getting variance requests. There was agreement that the protection of health information was important and critical, and we heard CHS always talk about how important it is to maintain that confidentiality. So there's been a request. What changed from 2013 to now?
Well, as you know, with the process, every time there's a request, there's a renewed look at the basis from jurisdiction all the way through. This is where we came out.
Okay. Go ahead. I'm going to go through all the questions here.
And I don't want to make that sound dismissive. As I said when we started, we're going to have full conversations. We have had many conversations with all of the agency partners previously.
Mr. Giovanni, we
Thomas
thought,
is my first name.
Thomas, we heard that you had pulled this variance. We asked to meet, and we were told that you pulled it because of the conditions on the variance. We asked to meet with you on the conditions, and you told us you didn't want to meet with us on the conditions. You actually don't think the board, you decided to have your boss nullify the board standard. And therefore, there was no condition to talk about because there was no standard to declare a variance for. Now, today, you say the problem is conditions. I would really like to understand the department, your department's reasons for creating this very serious problem, which didn't have to exist except for your actions.
I understand your perspective, and we are going to engage in those discussions.
Go ahead, Jackie.
If you are planning to engage in the discussion.
Yes, we actually already. I don't mean to interrupt you, but we have already actually scheduled that meeting for this week.
Why not request a variance, another short-term variance, as CHS did in January, to the next meeting to allow the space for those discussions?
I think the way that we've reached this particular moment is a combination of several factors, and the decision was made for this to be the proposed approach. I understand the perspectives, but we do believe that this is the right approach.
It just seems, is there been a foul? Has there been someone who was injured as a result of this? It just seems, these guys do God's work, right? They save people's lives. They work under extraordinarily difficult
Of course.
situations. They are wonderful. And it just seems that this is counterproductive against safety, against goodness, against, like, it just does not make sense that you would not try to be protective of people. And I've voted for these variances for many years. It's always been done thoughtfully, correctly, with the safety of people in mind and the protection
Yes.
of the people as well. It just does not make sense.
I understand your perspective. We're going to have the discussions. We are fully ready to talk these things through.
Go ahead, Stanley.
So operationally,
Yes.
where does this leave us? There's no request for variance. It expires at the end of today. Where does this leave this? Does it mean now CHS will no longer share information with DOC because they don't have the variance and because of the protections? Does it mean that they are going to share patient information regardless of whether or not they have the variance, which is a huge concern for us? That's one of the reasons for that standard. So what are the operational implications for the decision not to request a 30-day variance?
Well, of course, I will say, broadly speaking, we all share the concerns that you expressed about avoiding violence, about doing God's work, about keeping people safe. We do not believe that this will have an impact in that regard. We are working through the protocols. We do have a plan with CHS to continue to protect safety and patient records.
Can you address his question directly, though? His question was whether you plan to information to continue to be exchanged or not after today. I think that's what the question was.
I think I've been as direct as I can without getting into, again, the substance of the legal advice.
Yeah, we don't need any legal advice. We just need to know whether or not you plan the information.
We
will
think
continue.
that what we're going to do going forward will not jeopardize the information flow.
I have another question for CHS. CHS leadership has publicly and regularly written and spoken on patient privacy as a central tenet of medical ethics and the importance of upholding this ethic in the jails. Is CHS ethically comfortable with sharing health information, including individual patient diagnoses, with DOC anytime DOC asserts that such information is necessary to protect the health and safety of inmates and others?
Not without proper authority and safeguards.
Does CHS believe the new H&H policy on patient privacy described today requires any new notification to patients?
I feel like I'm on a stand. This is not a new health and hospitals policy. This is a law department opinion.
Considering the H&H policy allows for new routine sharing of patient health information without a variance, what new policies and systems does CHS and DOC have in place to protect patient privacy?
Yeah.
As I said before, we are working on those protocols to make sure that we can keep the information flowing as it should.
Tom, we had a meeting
Thomas.
scheduled, I said Tom, Thomas, sorry. Thomas, we had a meeting scheduled on this 10 days ago. The meeting was canceled because you didn't want to talk about the conditions, and you said a letter was going to come, and a letter comes a week later. There was plenty of time to work this thing out. Why are you precipitating a crisis in this? Why did you wait 7 days to come out with a response? And are you doing this at the request of CHS?
I'm not going to argue with you about the characterizations of how we got here. I think that would be rude and unproductive. I'm also going to reiterate that I'm not going to get into the substance of any legal advice that we gave to anybody other than what you have heard. And so I could not answer that question and should not answer that question about what I told to any of my agency partners in that particular regard.
Any further questions from the board?
The process is that you have, your office, your boss, has declared a Board of Corrections standard null and void, just because. By what authority do you have the right to nullify the Board of Corrections standards?
Again, Dr. Cohen, I'm not going to argue about the characterizations, and certainly nobody is saying that the Board of Corrections standards are just out the window.
inoperative. No.
I'm sorry, for the record, I shrugged, but I'm not going to get into that substantive discussion in any other form than the ones that we've discussed, which we are going to be having those discussions in.
So just so I'm understanding
Yes, sir.
where you're at, is that you are going to develop protocols for sharing information between CHS and DOC while we have conversations about whether or not the BOC standard regarding this issue is relevant to the information that CHS is sharing. So while you're developing these protocols, this information will be shared, and there's no sort of guardrails to ensure protections other than to say, we trust Patsy and we trust CHS and we trust Cynthia and we trust the department. Is that where we're at right now?
I think that's a very thin characterization of the existing protocols and the existing attitudes towards patient health privacy that we already have. I think CHS and DOC are already exchanging information in a fairly robust way. So when I say develop, I mean I should have probably said augment. I think we can manage this and make this transition, and we can walk and chew gum and have the conversation as well as we do that, as we've done on many issues before.
So you have,
I think sooner rather than later, you ought to let us know how you plan to operate in this environment, given the fact that there's no variance in place now.
That's very fair.
And point one and point two is, I think the board's responsibility now is to consider, based upon what you do going forward, whether or not CHS is in violation of the minimum standard in this regard. I think that's what that's our responsibility, but I think we need input from you, as I said, as soon as possible on how you plan to proceed going forward.
Understood.
I just don't understand why, at this point, you made a decision, you laid down a law, you changed something that's been for a while, and yet you don't have a procedure in place, and we're going to discuss it afterwards. I know we're on the department all the time, DOC, about, stuff like this, and they take, and then they, we constantly, try to get answers. Now, the law department comes around and says, hey, you know what, we're not going to do this anymore. We don't really have a plan. We'll discuss it. But right now, it is what it is, and they send you up here, to kill the messenger, actually. And your job is just to dip and weave because you really don't have anything. Your boss didn't give you anything to really come up and say, okay, here's a legit, thing we're going to do. I mean, I don't think it's out of, the realm to say 30 days, we're going to continue a variance, and we'll discuss a procedure that everybody can live with and everybody can stay safe. I don't think that's out of the ballpark. We do variances all the time. It doesn't have to be a 6-month. Doesn't have to be. It could be like 30 days. It could be even to the next meeting.
Well,
so
it
everybody
actually be
can
60 days because it's been 30 already.
Right.
So, this is the second go-round on the same issue. So it would be, if we're tacking on another 30 days, it's actually 60 days.
Right. This way we could at least have time to sit down and say, okay, what do we do? And my concern is there's not a procedure in place, and, well, it's going to work out. It's going to work itself out. Well, how's it going to work itself out? I mean, you're not coming up here with a plan. This is what we're going to do until we get it in place. I mean, there's no answers that are saying that that's how it's going to be. So my concern is, why are we here talking about this when, we could all sit down at a meeting, figure out what we're going to do, be on the same page. And, like, Mike said, it's all about keeping people safe. And these people do a rough job, and they need the information, and it's been happening for a long time. No one's been hurt. There's nothing, it's other than someone probably looked at it and said, we don't have to do that anymore. Let's do something different. All right, that's okay, but let's have a plan in place before we set it in progress. I just, not asking you a question, I'm just reiterating what everybody else is saying, and I'm concerned.
If I may just add, it is the responsibility of Corporation Counsel to minimize the risk to the city of New York.
Yes.
I cannot understand, for the life of me, why you would not put in place a variance while you are figuring this out. Because by not allowing for the variance, you are increasing the risk to the city of New York with respect to liability. It makes absolutely no sense. It's unfortunate that you've been sent here to essentially say nothing. It's an embarrassment, and it's a disgrace, and it's disrespectful.
I'm sorry you feel that way. We certainly intend no disrespect. Obviously, I'm here.
It's disrespectful.
I'm sorry you feel that way.
you as well.
I understand.
Dr. Cohen. We'll let you out of here soon, Mr. Giovanni.
That's okay. I started as a public defender. I can do this all day.
Yeah, well, you started it, so, you know.
It's fine.
I mean,
It's fine. I'm
we
listening.
have other work to do, but, you know.
I'm listening.
Yeah, this is not going to go on all day, but Dr. Cohen, go ahead.
I just, you know, the context is everything in this case. This is a context where the city and two of its agencies created a serious problem, which the board clearly identified through good research, that injury reporting was not happening. This is a serious health problem in the jails, and it is disturbing, to use a non-rude word, that the response of the city is to try to bury this stuff.
I think you get the sense of the board's views on this and the sense of frustration. And
Yes,
we really do need to get this resolved soon.
I agree.
Yeah. And I call upon you and your department to be an active participant and partner with us in getting some real answers out there and with CHS and ourselves. It's in everyone's interest to get this resolved.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
CHS, if you have anything else to say, or anyone else has any questions for CHS?
Not at this time about that matter, but we have been working very aggressively with the department to create a coordinated reporting process, a new form, a template, and a schedule. At some point in time, we can tell you about it.
When will that be ready?
I think we should wait and talk about it at another meeting. This was the subject of our conditions. Talk about it another time.
Okay.
Okay, thanks very much. I think you're now, we're now at the young adult. So our next topic is young adult housing and a commingling variance request. Martha?
Board standards require the department to house 18 to 21-year-olds separately and apart and to provide age-appropriate programming, otherwise known as the Young Adult Plan. Young adult housing allows for DOC and DOE to target resources to allow for access to education, age-appropriate programming, and staff who are trained to work with the young adult population. However, the department has sought and the board has granted repeatedly a variance on this requirement the past few years. While the department has consistently housed 18-year-olds in young adult-only housing, the majority of 19 to 21-year-olds have been housed throughout the system in adult housing. In September 2018, 78% of 19 to 21-year-olds were in commingled housing with adults. In October, the board granted a 3-month variance to assess DOC's progress toward housing substantially all young adults in young adult housing. The board granted a 5-week variance in January to allow for the chair's participation in this discussion today. In recent months, board members have met with the department, reiterated the importance of young adult housing and a young adult plan, and worked with the department to articulate a specific proposal for how it can safely implement the minimum standard. We commend the department for responding to this challenge and for beginning to solidify a young adult strategy framework that shows a commitment to compliance with the minimum standards is informed by the unique developmental needs of young adults and seeks to minimize the adverse effects of incarceration on the health and mental health of young adults. The department's commitment can be seen in its decision to move all young adult intake to RNDC, its construction of new outdoor recreation yards at the facility, its dedication of a programming staff member solely to young adult new admission housing, and additional officers to young adult-only houses. And ultimately, the department's decision to allow more young adults to benefit from young adult cohorting. In recent months, the department has significantly increased the number of 19 to 21-year-olds in young adult-only housing. In September 2018, only 22% of 19 to 21-year-olds were in young adult housing, but as of January, this proportion more than doubled and reached 58%. The department and board staff confirmed this week that our analyses result in the same numbers and that 67% of all 18 to 21-year-olds are currently in young adult-only housing. The board recognizes and appreciates this progress, while at the same time looking toward the considerable additional work that should be done. As we'll discuss in more detail, the board believes there are more young adults in the jails who can and must benefit from a young adult plan, including more programming, educational access, and dedicated staff and planning. I'm going to, forgive me. Young adults have increased as a percentage of RNDC's total population, increasing from 10% in June to 38% in July 2018, immediately following the closure of GMDC. The numbers of young adults increased to 63% of the RNDC census by December 2018. With this increase, there are still concerns about the facility's ability to manage this population without force, without lockdowns, and while preventing violence, including assaults on staff. We are also concerned about low school attendance numbers, particularly at RNDC. From September to January 2019, the overall young adult enrollment in school increased 69% from 176 students to 298 students. However, during this period, the overall young adult school attendance rate decreased from 40 to 25%. Over the same period, young adult school enrollment at RNDC increased 180%, while the attendance rate decreased from 44% to 23%. We encourage the department to move towards school-based housing for the young adult population to facilitate attendance and timely production to school. The specialized staff training and increased programming space that the department has committed to is critical and must happen as soon as possible. And the board remains committed to working with the department and DOE to make urgent and long-term improvements to the emerging young adult plan. And with that, will the department present the request and any other comments on this issue?
Good morning. Timothy Farrell, Senior Deputy Commissioner. We are requesting a 6-month variance renewal for the commingling of young adults, 19 to 21-year-old, with adults defined as 22 and older. Pursuant to Section 1-15F of the New York City Board of Corrections minimum standards, the New York City Department of Correction writes to request a 6-month limited variance renewal from BOC minimum standards 1-02C, Section 1, which as of February 12, 2019, requires inmates aged 18 through 21 be housed separate and apart from inmates over the age of 21. While the scope of the board's minimum standards 1-02C, Section 1, is applicable to young adults aged 18 to 21 inclusive, the department is seeking that this variance apply only for those young adults aged 19 to 21 years old. This renewal would take effect on February 12, 2019, the date upon which the current variance is set to expire.
So, Judge Ham.
Yeah, I actually have some questions, and I also just want to make some comments that maybe you can address yourself to. I did go out and tour RNDC yesterday and parts of GRDC. I've been hearing there was an issue, and our staff have reported that the, am I being picked up, that the attendance at school has really significantly dropped. And this is what I learned yesterday. I suspect yesterday wasn't an unusual day. It's probably more the norm, which is why I'm recounting it. What I learned yesterday is that in the housing units in RNDC now with the young adults, there's only one officer on the floor, on the tier, for up to, I think we saw one housing unit with 24 young adults. The housing officers, we were told by many sources, no longer escort the young adults to the school. The escort is provided by the DOC officers that are assigned to the school floor. We were informed by several sources that there's only 6 officers assigned to the school floor, and they are the ones that provide the escort. I was also very surprised to learn that there's no officers in the classrooms anymore. So all of the classrooms we saw The bulk of them were empty. They had teachers, but no students. And the ones that did have students had no officers. We were informed that for security reasons, once a certain number is reached, and we didn't hear what that number was, then no more young adults can come to school. And that there were 2 housing units yesterday that wanted to go to school, but they couldn't go to school for 2 reasons. One, it's not just an escort issue. It is partly that, because you then take this at least one of the 6 officers that are providing the security off the floor, but it's also a security issue for when all the young adults are there, because there's only 6 officers there. I was very troubled to learn that one of your floor officers was injured in school, on the school floor, a few weeks ago. Apparently what occurs now, and I witnessed it myself, because there's no officer in the classroom, the students can open the door and walk out, as one did yesterday. But what happened, I was told a few weeks ago, is that a student opened the door to allow other students come running in, and when the officer tried to maintain control, a chair or something was thrown at that officer and caused serious injury, breaking her nose and causing some other facial injuries. So this is, I think, a significant reason why you don't have the attendance of the young adults in school the way you did with the adolescents. Now, many of the leadership, anyway, that was present tried to explain it as a mandatory versus, compulsory versus an optional, that for the young adults it's only optional and they don't have to go to school. But they do have a legal right to go to school if they want to go to school, and you have a legal obligation to provide the escorts and also to provide the security. We also learned that, at least we had a very good conversation with the school psychologist and some of the counselors who say the students, some of them are afraid to come to school because they don't feel that there's adequate security. And we were told yesterday one of the teachers walked out of the classroom because that teacher didn't feel safe. Now, this is a really big change and a departure from what was offered to the adolescents. And I know it's mandatory for adolescents to go to school, but I don't understand the difference, and I'd certainly like you to address that. I should say I was extremely impressed with the Department of Education and their teachers, who I had an opportunity to speak to, and the counseling staff that were there. I was very impressed to go into the new admission units that have been created by DOC. I see you separate the 18-year-olds from the 19 to 21-year-olds, and the DOE staff is in there actually speaking to the young people and really trying to engage with them, persuade them to come to school, talk about the benefits for their court case, and also now they follow them for 6 months after being discharged to offer services. That was really all very impressive, but I was very disappointed to see so few students in school who are interested in going to school. That was very disappointing, and I was very disappointed to see what really felt like lack of security on the floor. You had those 2 wings, and so you had all the officers clumped at one area and the students in the classrooms by themselves, and had an opportunity to speak to more of the DOE staff that said people do not, even their own staff do not feel safe under these circumstances. So I would like you to address that, but also part of the young adult plan is the secure housing, and I wanted to make a comment about that. I had an opportunity to speak to the secure teacher who indicated that there's, and our records show too, there's much higher numbers of incarcerated youth in the secure, and I'm certainly pleased to see secure being used, because I think we all agree it's a really successful protocol, but it's only successful if adequate, if reasonable numbers are maintained, and I understand the numbers are going up to close to 20 now, which means that there's 5 inmates in a quad and there's more violence that's occurring, but it's really affecting their educational rights. Because what the teacher told me is because of the security issues now, he can only have 1 quad come to school at a time. Well, each of the young people who wish to go to school and don't have their GED have a legal right to go for 3 hours. But he conceded, it was very honest, that it simply cannot be done under the way that Secure is currently structured because of the security reasons. 1 quad can come for an hour a day, and then he tries to get 3 quads in. He can't get all 4 quads. And obviously, if others don't want to come, then maybe he can give 3 hours to the students out of one quad. So it does seem to me that there's been a big shift with, if this is accurate, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak to it, we all know one thing, people have a legal right to education, but we all know that that's the key to success. Whether you're incarcerated or not, the key to success is education. And what I was so thrilled to see is that the Department of Education is offering all-day school. They offer breakfast, they offer lunch, they're offering trades training up there now. So there's so much available to these young adults, and yet so few of them are able to take advantage. So I'd like you to address how you intend to meet the educational needs and the training needs of these young people to try to really give them the best opportunity to turn their lives around and to make for safe space for all of our officers, our teachers, and the young people.
Okay. For your staffing-related issues, I'll turn it over to First Deputy Commissioner Villona.
Good morning. So I'd just like to clear up the misperception that there's less staff assigned to the school area. There are differences with compulsory and non-compulsory school-age children or inmates and young adults. And so previously with compulsory age children, 16 and 17-year-olds, the housing area officer would accompany all of the children to the school area. And due to the fact that the housing area was essentially empty, everyone had to go to school. So that housing area officer would accompany the students to the school and remain in the school. Now, non-compulsory young adult inmates, if even one inmate remains back in the housing area, we have to have a housing area officer in that area. That is where the staffing is allocated to, and we have a responsibility to have somebody on that post. So previously, that officer who is budgeted for and assigned to the school would go to the school area with all of the students who had to go to school. Now, that is no longer the case, so we have to man that housing area.
No, I understand that, but that doesn't address the number of officers assigned to provide the security on the school floor. So you have a certain number of students there, and there are necessarily, as a result of the housing officer not going up, there is necessarily less security on the floor because there's no officers in the classrooms, and there's only 6 officers that are, this is what, I mean, I talked to a number of people. Everybody said the same thing. There was no disagreement on the facts that there were only 6 officers assigned to the floor. You have the 2 wings. It was really just one wing being utilized, I suspect partly because of security. And they specifically said because there is not enough officers assigned, and that was one of the requests that we were asked to make of DOC, is to assign more officers to provide the security. They don't have to be assigned to the housing unit, to provide the security so that when the officers are there, when the young people are there, when the teachers are there, they can learn and get the education that's being offered. I mean, there's lots of different ways you could do it, and this isn't meant to be critical, but I always notice that this at RNDC as opposed to other jails. There's always a lot of officers outside the housing areas and not inside the housing areas. I went to GRVC right after, and there you see a lot more officers inside the housing area. So it would appear there are more officers that could be assigned to the school if you're going to make a priority of young adult plan. And to me, part and parcel of a young adult plan is education and training for them. So your answer doesn't really address my issues.
I would strongly disagree with your assertion of the number of people that are assigned to housing areas and the ratio of officers to inmates in the housing areas at RNDC, but I'd be willing to discuss with you your findings or what it is that you perceive those ratios to be at GRVC or some other facility and at RNDC.
And I'll turn this over to my colleague, but the couple of housing units that I did go to, There were high numbers of inmates, and there was only one officer. The officers placed themselves sort of against the wall where they were not in the day room, where they could try to look into the day room with the cells and also look down the tier, because I understand another problem at RNDC that was kind of remedied in GMDC was the cell doors that the young people are placed in that can open. That's all. I only saw one officer in each of those housing areas, but just one moment, I'll turn it over to Dr.
So just to
Cohen.
answer your statement, our staffing levels at RNDC are appropriate to what is mandated.
But the violence, okay, let's set aside like the constitutional minimum floor under the Nunez, but violence has gone up in RNDC. And what we'll hear is it's the young adults. But if you know that they tend towards violence and they need more officers, I don't understand why in GMDC, when you had young adults there were 2 officers. There was one in the day room and there was one on the tier. I went over GRVC. There were 2 officers in the day room with the young people actively engaging. I didn't see that at RNDC. Now, I only went to a few units, but my colleague, Dr. Cohen, went about, and maybe you can talk about what you saw.
I can, although if there is some other particular response before I start. Chief, would you like to speak? The staff ratio should be, yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So in regards to the school and the education, one of the things that we have done is added a dedicated deputy warden of operations for this young adult plan there so that this person could attend to all of these discussions. Secondly, our facility operations chief has been in conversations with DOE to now increase the school levels to C, and the facility has been advised to submit 119s for those additional posts so that this way we can ensure that we have adequate staffing, if need be, for the increase of students that want to go to school.
So thank you. It sounds like you're addressing the issues that I'm raising, saying
Yes,
that may not be
with Mr.
adequate, but you
Marinacci,
do need
yes.
to increase. Okay.
Yes. Thank you. I was there yesterday also. Our data on this is consistent with your new practice, which is that the percentage of we're talking about people with not non-mandatory participation in RNDC young adult population, and that the percentage of people the attendance rates have gone down from September to October, November, December, and January. That's what our report shows, and I appreciate your responding to that. There are a few other areas that I'd like to ask about. The last point that Brian made about violence is of course distressing to you and to the correction officers and to the people living in the units. And in the report that the response to our letters. Asking a lot of questions about the young adult program. We asked, what is the staffing model configuration for young adult only units? And your response was, the department intends to maintain the same staffing plan for young adult units that was in place at GMDC and that is currently in place at RNDC. 2 officers will continue to staff each housing unit with 1 officer in the day room and the other officer on the tier. An additional officer will be stationed in the A station, the bubble. Now, I went to about 6 or 7 housing areas in RNDC yesterday, and in none of those areas were 2 officers present. And in your own, legal staffing plan for the day, you don't reflect that because that's not what's going on. Can you describe what your plan is? Because I'll just say, just one last point. It's rhetorical, but I'm going to say it anyway. There are 5% of the population is in RNDC right now, and 25% of the uses of force in January in the entire department occurred in RNDC. And this is the staffing situation that's going on there. You need to have the 2 offices that you had. Please, Chief.
So as FDC Villanona talked about the staffing levels, we're capping off the adolescent houses or the young adult houses at a certain census. So in the housing areas where we find that we do need an additional staff member to be there, we will add those staff members to those houses.
You will.
Yes.
But the report to us said that it was the case. Was that aspirational or a plan going forward?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I appreciate that. Do you have any idea when
this will take
Well, the
place?
FDC and his staff just finished the analysis, so we're working on getting that done.
Okay, and, but in the report, you said 2 officers will continue to staff each housing unit, 1 in the day room and 1 in the tier, with 1 in the bubble. Is that the plan? Because what you said had to do
So
with
in some of the
staffing.
housing areas, there may not be a count over 6 inmates.
I understand that. And that, for example, a TRU unit or an MO unit?
Correct.
And then you would just staff with 1
Just
person?
a staff of 1.
So this is not what your plan is?
What's not what my plan?
The
I
department
just-
intends to maintain the same staffing plan for young adult units that was in place in GMDC 2
So
and 1.
I'm sorry, but I just told you what the plan was.
Okay, so this is different than what we received. I have another question regarding programs at there. Do you have the ability or the plan to track assessment and program participation at the individual level? I'm concerned, and that would be, for plan, for individual when their programming begins, when it ends. Not because what we get right now is hard for me to interpret, at least. There are 22 plans and 80 people participate. You don't know if 4 people participated in 22 plans, for example.
Sure. Good morning, everyone, and thanks again for touring the facility and recognizing what we deal with on a daily basis, as you saw as well. It's a very complicated population, and in terms of assessments, what we are doing is we're looking at identifying the most effective assessment tool to use for this population. And what we're going to do, what we intend on doing is rolling that assessment tool out and utilizing it in our new admission housing unit, while simultaneously, contemporaneously with that, is looking at an incentive-based model to positively reinforce pro-social behavior and interest in education while addressing misconduct inside the facility or around the facility in the least punitive way possible. So, and that is part of our young adult plan as we move forward, is also training staff. We have motivational interviewing that's going to be hopefully rolled out, and it looks like it's going to happen in March. We're waiting for an assessment done on the actual curriculum that's going to be used for staff. So we're actually targeting this in several different ways. One, from the individual standpoint in terms of assessing those individuals and how, with the technology that we have and the staffing that we have, that we can provide real accurate data on an individual basis. And we do provide a lot of that already in the ESH units, for instance, and secure, but as we scale up in terms of numbers, that becomes increasingly harder for us to do on an individual basis. But we're confident that we will be able to provide that information so we can track not only negative conduct, but also the pro-social conduct, and then start to put the pieces together. If we look at this population overall, we're looking at a population that is charged with serious crimes. So there's a lot of trauma that's behind behind those charges, and how we can best effectively target those thinking errors and that criminal behavior moving forward. So not only can we produce a more safer facility and a more safer system, but also help them as either they go up to a different state facility in terms of helping them out on that end, or if they're able to be released into the community. And part of that is our vendors that we use in terms of hooking them up with the mentorship programs, Friends of Island, or some other entities that we utilize to stabilize and support them in the community.
Thank you. Just following up on that, I noticed, I urged the department and my colleagues to use a national definition of young adults, which is under 25, not under 24. We won't have that discussion today, but I hope to at a future meeting. But I did notice in your plans going forward a notion that the young adult program should potentially not be available to people who are not interested in education or not interested in programs or who don't behave well. And I thought, as you just described, that the young adult program is not based upon people's behavior. It's based upon their age cohort and our neurological understanding of the implications. So the young adult program should not be skewed against people who are not the solid citizens that you only have some of. Sure. In RNDC. So I think it's going to be difficult to create the young adult program that you want to describe when you're not basing it upon the cohort, but rather on their behavior there.
mean, education is, you know, this is not a group of people who have really loved education. In fact, they've been subjected to a pipeline that's ended, you know, put them where they are.
Sure, if I can clarify for you,
Yes.
sir. When I talk about positive reinforcement, I'm not talking about education, nor am I talking about hard skill development. I'm talking about some of those other positive reinforcers that can propel an individual moving forward. So whether that's some sort of entertainment component or if that's some sort of enhanced recreation, that's what I'm talking about in terms of positive reinforcers. I agree with you that education if a young adult, and we are committed to providing education to a young adult that's interested in it, we also have the complexity in terms of what's going on in facilities. So as we move forward, as we have merged young adults and adults into one while still maintaining age-specific philosophy in terms of how to offer effective intervention with these individuals, there's some road work that we have to do to get there. So in a way, we're reconstructing some of the philosophical approaches to working with young adults so that if an individual is interested in education, they're performing well, both behaviorally as well as educationally, that they'll move through a system and be offered even more enhancements. And while those individuals that are somewhat, as we can say, stuck and rooted in criminal thinking or negative behavior, how to effectively intervene in that behavior one-on-one, group work, in the housing unit, in the classroom, how to keep motivating them to look at these various aspects of their incarceration or their detainment, that they could use that in a more positive
Your young
way.
adult program says that people who don't want to participate are not going to be in the program. I didn't understand that because the program is not based on what people do. It's based upon their age.
Correct. I'm not dismissing it or negating access to education. I am not saying that
I'm not talking
at
about
all.
education. I'm talking about the young adult program is not based upon people's desire to pursue education or participate in the program.
It's a comprehensive look at a young adult and how to help them and have a more therapeutic environment for them while they're detained.
Can I want to go back to the officer per inmate ratio for a moment, because I think we really need to understand what the plan is. So Chief, if you can just tell us, you made a mention that there is a cap. If you could please tell us what the cap is. And also, you said you'll put another officer when you deem it's necessary. Sometimes there's only 6 in a housing unit. In that case, you might not deem it's necessary. So what is your plan in terms of the ratio of officers assigned to a housing unit per incarcerated youth housed in that unit?
So, like I said, is that when the count or when the census reaches a certain number, we will have the facility add an additional officer
What
to
is
that number.
That's what I want to
We'll
know.
come up with it. No
Well, you
more
don't
than
have it
15.
now.
No, yes, it is. So right now, we're obligated to have 3 officers when the census is 25. Yeah.
So are you saying it's
Total
are you saying
census,
the cap is 25?
25.
That's when you're going to put
No,
a
total
second
census
officer?
25. But again, there are some housing areas that are not giving any incidents.
Any incident? So
Right. So I'm saying this is to say, so when we talk about true and second chance, to have an additional staff member there, regardless to the count, that may be feasible. But if the count, we can have up to 25 inmates in a housing area with 3 officers,
when you say 3, that's not what
an
we're seeing.
A, B, and C officer.
Okay, so we're only seeing 1 officer on the floor and 1 officer. So can you just tell me what that ratio is that you're thinking of?
The ratio is 1 to 15, 2 to 25.
Okay, and that's not what we're seeing. That's not what we saw in RDC yesterday. Absolutely not.
So I would like to know those housing areas.
Sure.
And you can forward that
We've got them.
information.
Yeah, we've got those housing areas. Some of the officers, and the one thing I want to say, you know, you've got really incredible officers working, as you did with the adolescents, the young adults. Several of them that I had spoken to had come from GMDC, and you know, asked what's the difference between what you saw in GMDC or what you experienced in here. And what they said, and a couple of them said this is, I don't feel I can be as effective here.
5
And
Upper
so we
South
want
has
to give
17.
your officers
Is that the only
tools
house
they
you saw?
need to be
Okay.
effective.
I apologize
There
for
were
interrupting.
several different units, right?
Okay, so I'll look into that one housing area.
Well-
And then I will have them check every housing areas, but there is
5
no
Upper
housing
South,
area.
one upper South. One, and there's another one, Mod 3 Upper North.
And the new admission
Bobby, if
for
you could
19
just
to
forward
21.
us the list of that
I could,
housing
but I
areas,
told you, but I mean,
then I'll
really-
look into
really-
it.
Really, you know what we're saying is correct. I mean, I don't understand why, I mean, you know there's only one officer there for units with.
I
more
would
than 15
disagree with
people.
that. And as I said, I would
Okay.
prefer, for security reasons, if you didn't
Well, you just asked
specific, if you didn't, I asked for you to forward that information. But for security reasons, I would prefer if you didn't name housing
Fine,
units.
I thought, I will look at the.
Housing units in a public forum. I would be happy to look into what you saw yesterday if you forward that information to us. Thank you.
Ms. Sherman, you had Ms. Yeah, Stanley, then you next. Yeah.
Thank you. Could you speak to what indicators the department will be looking at on a systematic basis to determine the success of the initiative? So what specifically, what indicators will you be looking at, and at what intervals will you be looking at those and examining those and using the data that you examine to drive further improvements forward?
Thank you for your question. That's a very broad stroke of a question about how to measure that. There's various ways that you can measure success. It could be based on mapping information in terms of incidents going down. It could be based on violence going down, whatever indicator you're looking at. It could be based on recidivism rates going out the door, about is our programming having an impact on that. So to stand here and say what that is, that's a collective decision by the department about what we consider success. So it's very hard to stand here right now and give you various indicators that are going to define that.
Might there be an opportunity at some point in the future to hear what I can understand if that's not fully formed at this point, but might there be an opportunity in the future to hear what the department is looking at in terms of the indicators? And I understand that that is a complex analysis. I also would hope and would be happy to have the opportunity to engage on the question of the indicators the department will be looking at, how it assesses what those indicators should be to determine success.
Sure, and I think we could all agree that there's various general categories we can look at. Violence reduction, misconduct reduction, grievance reduction, increase in individuals obtaining their high school education, those that are participating, participation rates going up, recidivism going down. So there are general indicators that we can look at. Then as a collective whole, I'm sure we can become more specific on that. So I'd rather not speak for the department on that particular point, but we can all understand that there are general indicators that we can look at and will look at and do look at on a daily basis as well.
I would encourage you. I mean, the question is really why do you have this plan and why do you have this strategy? It's because you're trying to accomplish something, and I would love to hear that as well. The question I had is on the young adult plan that was submitted, there was a statement about assessing whether people would go into a young adult housing includes behavior. Is there a time frame that you're looking at for that behavior? Is it regarding incidents at that moment? Or are you going back 3 years?
No,
Like,
it's at the moment. It's
at
current behavior.
Perfect. So if their behavior at
We're not using a look-back window.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you.
Dr. Safi, you good? Yeah.
Deputy Commissioner Farrell, we spoke extensively the other day. I appreciate it. We got a lot of stuff done, and I truly feel the department is really, striving to go in the right direction. And Chief Jennings, we spoke also, and have a lot of confidence. My concern, though, is we spoke maybe 2 months ago, and you stated, correct me if I'm wrong, you're going to try to stay within that 15 limit, and most of the housing areas aren't going over 15. And it seems like now they're going higher, and they're going higher because you're getting more young adults in the program in which we've asked for, and I think that's great. when I did tour there, the officers were concerned, and they told me a lot of their ideas, and a lot of times they spoke, and what we're all speaking about now is that second officer, one in the day room, and one to be able to go up and down the tier. I know there's a 119 involved, and I do know for a fact, sometimes those 119s you can put in every single year and just nothing's happening, and then the important ones get approved quick. I mean, is it possible, you know, we could run a post temporarily like we've done many times? I know fiscally, Devil knows, not trying to hear that. I understand he has a job also. But when it comes to the violence that's going up, you know, just to try something different. 73, you know, that 2 officers was kind of built in, and they were good towards it. And maybe if we get the violence down, you can pull that second officer when you don't really need it. But like right now, when you're trying to figure out where the gangs are, you're moving things around and stuff, and you have kind of a volatile situation where you have over 100 uses of force in a facility which doesn't have a lot of people. You know, just could that be considered? You know, a lot of us up here, you know, thought there's going to be 2 officers, and I know fiscally that could be an issue. And Chief Jennings, you know, 100% correct. You're going to put it where it's needed. Like right now, wouldn't the department consider it's needed right now, considering the high uses of force and the high violence that's happening right now in that facility? And like I said, you got great staff. Horizons went from out of control, and now it's running really well as far as I'm concerned. I see, you know, it's running efficiently. Is it possible we can consider doing that in that facility? You know, for maybe just try something. Just try the 2 officers, see if it might bring it down. Because that's what I was getting from the officers. You know, we tell everybody we need that second officer, but nobody's listening to us. That's what the staff is saying.
Well, as the chief and the first deputy commissioner have indicated in great length, we do look at areas and we adjust staffing to areas just like we would do anywhere else in hotspots or other particular or high class or high management areas, whether it be true or second chance. So that's done on a daily basis, both at the facility level and the chief's office. So yeah, so we're not closed to that, but you know, there are steps and there are certain reviews that need to be discussed. And again, we can discuss and have a more detailed conversation about some of those thoughts you may have offline.
Right, no, I appreciate that. I think we both agree, and I'm sure Chief Jennings and everyone agrees. If
Sure.
staff and the young adults don't feel safe, really nothing else matters. So no matter what initiatives, as much as programs you can put out there, it doesn't matter until people actually start feeling safe. And then once people start feeling safe, which really goes down to the violence and the uses of force, you know, then all of a sudden everything gets popped up. Programs, people start going to programs. People start, you know, going to initiatives. People start going to work. People start feeling safe and not trying to group up in their gang. You know, they feel safe. And I think that extra officer, even just a temporary, let's see if it'll work. Just it'll be something that to try to bring it down. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. Our goal is to deploy the resources that we have into the areas that need it most.
Thank you.
I just had
Yeah,
one
Judge,
question. I know we've been on. Just in terms of access to health and mental health, our staff have informed us in December of 2018, the highest number, there were a fair number of appointments that were missed for young adults, but that the highest was in mental health, and that only 54% of the 2,300 scheduled mental health appointments for young adults were kept, which is lower than on average for all of Rikers, which is more like 66%. Do we know why only a few more than 50% made it to their mental health appointments, which I think we would all agree is very, very important for this population?
Well, we have dedicated mental health units and dedicated mental health staff to that facility. Absent the data that you're citing, I don't have that answer for you, and we can certainly look into that if you would forward that to us.
I think it's escorts. I think the problem is escort to the area.
Like I said, I'd like to see it, and then we can make that assumption.
Can we hear from DOE?
Good morning, Board. How are you?
Good morning.
It's good to see everybody. Nick Marinacci, Senior Executive Director, New York City Alternative Schools, District 79. No one's more upset about low school attendance than the Department of Education. I do want to speak to some of the things you said, Judge, which I think are really important. First of all, with the 18 to 21-year-old population, we've never, ever had officers in the classroom with that age group. I'm not up here to say it's not necessary. What I am saying is I think some of what of our teachers may be saying who are at RNDC, have worked in RNDC for, many of them have worked at RNDC their entire career on Rikers. Some of that spans 20 years. And RNDC was always a mandated age facility, and so there were always officers in the classrooms, as the Deputy Commissioner mentioned, as students came down. With the 18 to 21-year-old facilities across the island throughout kind of the history of education on Rikers, GMDC, GRVC, when we had general population school at OBCC, the officers were really never in the classrooms. There were always dedicated school officers, and the students were brought down by different escort officers. So I just want to clarify that point. I'm not sure, and that's something we're working with on our staff, and I agree with, I'm going to call him Chief Warden Perino, but you know, we know that everyone needs to feel safe in the school, but we also know that there is something to an older 18 to 21-year-old population. We want to build a culture where our teachers could be, you know, in that classroom with the students. And again, historically, we've had very, very low levels of incidents when we had education in 18 to 21-year-old with that age group population anywhere else. So I'm not saying it's not the issue, but it had never been a major issue in the past. In terms of school attendance, I think that we're all struggling with the 18 to 21-year-old population. I think it's really important for us to all think about, for the last decade, the average attendance of that age group has been around 34%. Now, no doubt, it went down from September to January this year, and I think there's a lot of reasons why, and you know, I'm not sure of the exact reasons why, but it's not an age group that school engagement has been very high with in the past. I would encourage, and I meet with the board on a quarterly basis, and we share data with the board or with members of the board's research team, for us to look beyond attendance percentage and maybe look at the average daily attendance, the numbers of actual students in the school. The attendance percentage gets skewed by the number of people who are in court. We also have a very, I'm not going to get into the weeds here, but we sometimes carry students in our attendance even if they're discharged from Rikers Island. There's like a little gap between the time that they get discharged and they find a new school, and so that's why the average daily attendance is never 100%, even in a mandated facility. So we might want to look at the number of students, and there we have some good news. We saw that in the first couple of weeks of February, the number of kids actually going to school in RNDC Maine went from 12 in early January to 18, right? So that's a good, it's not where we want it to be. We'd love to see 100 kids on the floor every day, but it's going in the right direction. And Chief Jennings mentioned we've had 2 meetings. We actually, before the stories hit the papers, we met with Chief Scott and her team on January 22nd and again last Friday to discuss specifically what we're going to do about trying to improve numbers at RNDC. And some of those things that we discussed are, we have now put dedicated staff. I think you mentioned you met one of them yesterday, our psychologist, Dr. Zarchin, to go to new inmate housing 3 days a week to do a better job of recruiting and targeting the young adults, specifically with actual transcripts in hand, so we could tell students like, hey, this is how close you are to graduating, a much more targeted orientation process. So we're hoping that increases both enrollment and attendance. That's the first step, is trying to get them right at the beginning. And the fact that RNDC is now the main new admit hub for 18 to 21-year-olds, we think will really help with that, as we have a good staff in there recruiting and trying to encourage them to come. And then it's continually working, as Chief Jennings mentioned, Deputy Warden, I think it's Vassatoro at RNDC, is now meeting with the principal regularly. We have a regular weekly meeting where we'll review this attendance data. I mean, I think our goal in connection with DOC is to definitely get those numbers up over the course of the year. And I'm just as worried about achievement as I am about attendance. And there's a lot of students, you know, I'm not going to say it's easier than ever, but there are more opportunities than ever for students to earn a high school equivalency diploma. Now, if you have a past Regents exam anywhere in your past, it counts as part of one of the 5 parts of the test. So this is huge. Guys might not need to take all 5 parts of the exam, and we need to do a better job of making sure that we're letting all students know of that opportunity. As the chief mentioned, we added 2 career technical education components to RNDC during the school day, a carpentry class and a culinary arts class that we're building up in the school during the day. That's our long-term vision for this. The other thing I would say is in terms of DOE just talking about the variance in terms of the mixing of populations, we have a new opportunity this year. The Department of Education has reorganized some of its senior leadership, and now the Office of Adult Education falls under District 79, which is our district. So we've talked to the department about expanding access in the classrooms where possible and where it makes sense for them to age 24-year-old inmates, because we agree with Dr. Cohen, you're an adult until 25 and under, and so we want to start with that age group. So we might be able to start to expand school services at certain sites to 24-year-olds. So there we think, I don't know if that affects the housing variance, I don't know that much about it, but we think that that could really be a huge benefit to a big part of the population out there.
Terrific. Thank you. I just have one question based on what you said, and again, I was very impressed with what I saw with all your staff. But is there currently a protocol, because I understand what you're saying, but what you're saying is kind of different than what I heard when I was on the ground by the teachers, by the school counseling staff, by the officers. They were all expressing that there was really a problem with it not feeling safe and not having security. So accepting that there's no reason to have the officers in there, is there a protocol in place between you all and DOC that when additional security is needed to be able to accommodate the request and the security needs, that will occur? I mean, what we were told yesterday is that 2 housing units wanted to come and they couldn't come. And when I asked the officer, she said, based on the number of young adults we have here now, we cannot allow any more young adults to come. And they said they had a terrible time getting additional officers when they needed them, and nobody would do the escort but them. So what's the protocol to work that out on a daily basis?
I think our protocol is always, as you said, Judge, if somebody signed up for school, they have a right to come to school, right? And so unless there is a specific security issue that day that is preventing them from coming to school, the number of people in school shouldn't impact the numbers of inmates who are coming to school. I mean, the protocol that I would say is the assistant principal who's at the site, we have an assistant principal at RNDC every day, should let the deputy warden know which houses are not there, and they should let us know why they're not there.
Maybe you could work on
We definitely will work on that
developing a
communication.
protocol.
I mean, on any given day, there are issues, and I think one of the biggest challenges, and it always has been for young adult education, I say 18 to 21s, is when they don't come to houses of school, you've got a trickle coming from this house and a trickle coming from that house and a trickle coming from that house, and it always leads to either escort or safety issues. So our position has always been, the more guys who are in the same house, the easier it is for that house to get to school. And I understand it can't always work that way. From security perspective, that's something we always advocate for and try to work with DOC on a daily basis on.
But school-based housing would help with that, right? If they were housed
I will
according
say
to
that
school.
the one thing I could always say is the attendance has always been the highest in places where we've had school-based housing. So when GMDC had success houses, when EMTC had success houses, that was always indicated in the attendance.
I think we need to
I'd like to just
move this. Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Marinacci, I'd just like to say, I was deputy warden in RNDC for about 6 years. A better educational professional I've never seen, better than you.
There's a lot of them out there, trust me.
You are amazing. You've made the change. I'm honest with you, I went back when the teachers were scared to death in the classrooms and in the corners. You were the ones who really made the change, and I appreciate all your efforts. You are definitely excellent at what you do, and the department's lucky to have you at the helm. Just one question, though. In GMDC, it was very successful, obviously. It was built up. What was the attendance there, and why are we trying to reinvent the wheel? If we were successful there, and kids were, there wasn't compulsions, or you didn't have to go, but I believe the numbers were high. What was the average attendance there, based on the population that we had? The population was probably 500.
Yeah. So the attendance really never cracked in the mid-30s in terms of percentage. In terms of numbers on the school floor, GMDC, the best it ever was probably when Horizon Academy was around, and then a couple of years after that, when we had Mod 10 in where the Peace Center ended up, or it wasn't near I don't remember where it was, but Mod 10, there was a group of students who lived right in Mod 10, and then they went to school right in the Mod 10 annex school. So they just went across. So there was a house very close to the school, and most of the people in that house, and then we would get about 60 a day in that school, and we'd get 30 to 40 a day in the main. GMDC always ebbed and flowed. A good day would always be 30 or 40 students with the 18 to 21-year-old population. That would be on the high end, and then some days you'd get many fewer. And I think the reason we get fewer is it depends on the day. It's not always a safety issue. I mean, sometimes the inmates just don't, as Dr. Cohen, I think Dr. Cohen said, you have a population, the average attendance before they come to Rikers in school, their last school attendance, and now they're 18 to 21, like 75% of the students we're getting were previous dropouts. So they already dropped out in the community. And their average school attendance before they dropped out is in the 30s. So you can't expect people to go from 38% attendance to 100% attendance. It just doesn't happen. We definitely can do better, and I think we have to do better on our end in providing, engaging educational experiences that matter for the young people, and that's why we're trying to add the CTE and make sure that our classes, it's not just DOC's responsibility to get them there. We have to have good and engaging classes to keep them there. And so that's something that we're constantly working on.
So at almost a central point, it was in the 30s, high 30s.
Yeah, 30s, 40s, yep.
And we're like 18 now.
Yep, so we could definitely...
So we're in the ballpark. I mean, that number is important for me to know because I'm used to hundreds.
Right,
because
right.
It was, close to
Right.
what I'm used to. So I think we're in the ballpark, and I think maybe there's some things that we were doing in GMDC. Maybe, Chief, you could look into houses with just that gold school and stuff like that, what we were doing there. And no one knows more than GMDC than Chief Jennings.
Yep.
Who, is GMDC. So I think, I think we're going in the right direction.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions here on the board, I think what we need to do is to, first of all, get a motion to approve the variance, and then we can deal with the conditions.
Motion?
So is there a second? Yep. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Dr. Cohen, you oppose it? Yeah. Okay, so it's 8-1. So now, there are two variants, there are two conditions, as I understand it, with respect to this variance, one on existing condition, and then there's a new condition.
That's right. Do you want me to read?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll read the first condition, which is a new one. DOC shall house male young adults 19 to 21 in young adult only housing unless A, he is housed in a restrictive housing area with less than 14 hours lockout, i.e. ESH. B, he is engaged in violent or assaultive behavior towards staff or other people in custody. Or C, he is engaged in actions that threaten the safety and security of the facility, e.g. cell door manipulation. These factors will be applied case by case and will only result in an individual young adult's placement in commingled housing with ages 22 plus after an individual determination is made. As of March 12th, 2019, the department shall document each determination in writing, including the reason for such determination and all CODs and incident reports supporting each determination. The department shall send notification to the person in custody within 3 days that includes for which reasons of the 3 listed above they are being moved. The department shall send the board a biweekly report of all such determinations, including the reason for the housing determination and the full record of CODs and incident reports supporting such determination.
Now, is that the new condition or is that the existing condition?
New.
New condition. Okay.
Does DOC have any comment on that condition?
No,
we
accept it.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so now we need to vote on this condition. Is there a motion for that?
Motion.
Just this condition. Is there a second? Okay, we'll take a...
I'd like to make a comment on it. We've had no discussion on this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thing.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to vote against this, this condition. I don't think the behavior of someone in young adult is a reason for them not to be in the young adult program. The board should be putting our efforts towards encouraging the department to expand rather than contract the young adult program. So I'm going to be voting and urge other board members to vote against this condition.
I will do a roll call. Mr. Perino?
Yes.
Ms. Sherman?
Yes.
Dr. Safier?
Yes.
Yes.
Richards? Judge Hamel?
Yes.
Dr. Cohen, I assume you vote no? Ms. Jones-Austin?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Thank you. So that condition carries.
The second condition is an existing condition, which reads, during the pendency of this variance, the department shall provide the board with a monthly census showing in which housing units and jails 18 to 21-year-olds are housed, and the department shall continue to A, provide the board with a monthly progress report on its implementation of the young adult plan and implementation of alternatives to punitive segregation, i.e. second chance, true, and secure units, and B, provide its progress report for each month on the 10th business day of the following month. That's an existing condition.
I take it the department's okay with that? No comment or comment?
No, we're good.
Yep, okay. So we need a motion for that? Is there a motion?
Motion.
Is there a second? Thank you. We'll take a roll call. Mr. Perino? Yes. Sherman?
Yes.
Dr. Safir?
Yes.
Richards?
Yes.
Yes.
I vote yes. Thank you. That carries. So now we need to vote for everything. Is there a motion for that? We're voting now on the variance itself plus the two conditions. Okay, is there a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we'll go through the roll call again. Mr. Perino?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Dr. Safir?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
I vote yes. Thank you. That variance with the two conditions is now approved. Yeah, so now we're going to go to ESH, and I think the Commissioner would like to make a statement there. Thank you, Commissioner.
Good morning. This next point is not for discussion, but for clarification only. Based on the census of RNDC and the housing units population, out of the 21 open housing areas, only 4 have a census that would require 2 officers. 2 of those housing areas have 18 young adults and 2 have 20. So I just want to put that in perspective, that it's not widespread. So with the discussion on ESH, I'd like to start by saying that we believe that DOC and BOC share the same overall goals: to run a system that is safe, humane, and results in positive outcomes. And we are working every day on how to do that well. We've been before you on this ESH variance many times before, 7 to be exact, and we've spent a considerable amount of time discussing the use of the restraint desks in ESH Level 1. While this is without question an important subject that is deserving of our attention, the level of focus on that one particular tool for safety overshadows deserved attention to the impressive scope of reforms that we have achieved together. And so I'd like to take a minute to reflect on what we've accomplished together in only a few short years to put today's variance discussion in appropriate context. Before the department began an aggressive effort to reform its use of punitive segregation in 2013, there were over 600 individuals in punitive segregation on any given day, including over 250 adolescents and young adults aged 16 to 21 years old. In 2015, after reforms to punitive segregation for young adults, its use was reduced by half, with approximately 80 young adults, or 7% of the young adult population, in punitive segregation on any given day. And together with the support of the board, the department has fundamentally transformed the structure of punitive segregation in New York City jails. Together, we have lowered the daily PSEG population by over 79%, from over 600 in 2013 to approximately 120 individuals today, and without including anyone aged 16 to 21. Today, punitive segregation is only used for adults aged 22 and older and focused specifically on violent infractions and sentence durations that are directly proportional to the specific act that is committed. Individuals are released from punitive segregation for at least 7 days before returning to punitive segregation and cannot serve more than 60 days in any 6-month period unless that individual commits an egregious infraction that warrants an override. Such overrides are considered by the chief of department and only approved when the alternative would place inmates and staff in direct danger. During the 3.5 years that this override has been available to DOC, the chief has approved its use in fewer than 30 times. We are proud of these important reforms and would like to see this trend continue, with punitive segregation used only as the last resort. At the same time that punitive segregation was eliminated, ESH was identified as a necessary housing option in order to safely house a limited number of violent young adults in both a structured and secure setting that managed their contact with other inmates and staff, but also provided for the delivery of enhanced programming. The type of programming offered focuses on facilitating rehabilitation, addressing the core causes of violence, and minimizing idleness. Within ESH, there are 3 levels, with each one having a more tailored environment for the young adult to facilitate their return to general population. A young adult can only be placed in level 1, the most restrictive level, if they have recently participated in an attempted or actual stabbing or slashing, or engaged in activity that caused serious injury to an officer, another person in custody, or any other person within the facility. Level 1 affords 7 hours of lockout times, 3 more hours if they elect to attend school, during which time a restraint desk is utilized that enables the provision of school, programming, and socialization with peers while also ensuring safety. Young adults who have not recently engaged in violent activities are not eligible for placement in ESH Level 1 and therefore may be considered for Level 2, which do not, Level 2 and Level 3 do not utilize the restraint desk during lockout time. In January 2019, the department began providing a separate school session for those young adults in Level 2 and 3. That does not include young adults in Level 1, which means there is no longer a need to restrain those young adults in 2 and 3 in the desk during school hours. In 2017 and 2018, approximately 3% of young adult population was in ESH on any given day, with approximately 1% in the Level 1 most restrictive placement. As of yesterday, there were a total of 25 young adults in ESH housing, only 3 young adults in Level 1, 16 in Level 2, and 6 adults in Level 3. Let me be clear that the progress we've made in our limited use of ESH is not a fluke. It didn't just happen. It is the result of consistent hard work, adherence to program fidelity, and establishment of an operational structure that is embedded within the agency and that has the full support of staff. It is important that we acknowledge the role of DOC uniformed staff. Nothing in our system would be successful without their participation and buy-in. And we heard today accolades for CHS staff who are doing God's work. And we heard praise for DOE staff who are amazing. But rarely do I hear in this room praise for DOC staff, for our officers, who are also doing amazing work every single day under the same difficult circumstances. So I will say it today, we don't get everything right, but I will put my staff up against any correction agency in this country. Eliminating the use of punitive segregation for young adults was a dramatic change in policy and did not happen overnight. It has taken a lot of training and readjusting for staff to reach a level of confidence and comfort that this can work. And our officers who work in our jails not only need, but must have the confidence that this administration can keep them safe. Right now, that means continuing to use ESH, including the use of desks in Level 1, as an option for managing the most violent young adults in our custody. While we have worked together with the board over the years to refine the placement criteria for the levels of ESH and the length and dynamic of periodic reviews, right now, the use of ESH, including the use of restraint desks in Level 1, the tool that we have that affords the greatest measure of safety when managing the most violent young adults. We remain open to considering other models and welcome suggestions, but at this time, we have not identified an alternative that will be as effective at maintaining everyone's safety. We have researched alternatives, but what we have found, the other types of secure chairs or booths that would allow people to participate in programming while also preventing violence to staff and other detainees, look more restrictive and less humane to us. So we have not pursued them. We have appreciated the board's support during this period of significant groundbreaking reform, including the urgence of important changes. to the operation of ESH, such as narrowed placement criteria, more frequent reviews, and the presence and participation of the young adults in their own review. These changes support a culture of fairness and transparency and ensure that these restrictive housing units are only used when required. There has been considerable positive change within our department over the past few years, but we are not at a point where we can commit to eliminating the desks. We are committed, however, to continuing to look for alternatives, working with the board to make changes where appropriate, and continually evaluating our need for their use. So I thank you for the opportunity to come before you this morning, and now I will turn it over to Senior Deputy Commissioner Tim Farrell and Deputy Commissioner Mike Tosek to introduce the variance. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to, hold on one second, if I can. Commissioner, I want to thank you and congratulate the department on a couple of things. One, the tremendous progress you made over the last few years on punitive segregation in general, and also, I think, the kind of thoughtful and careful consideration you've given in recent months to the board's many concerns about ESH in particular, and also about restraint desks as well. And so, I mean, I think we do recognize how much progress you made. I think we recognize the thoughtfulness you brought to all of it, and your continuing search to make the unit better in terms of the inmates there. So we do recognize that. We appreciate it, and we thank you for that. And we will continue to, on the same route together, to try to get to a point that at some point maybe restraint desks won't be necessary at all. Apparently now only 3 people are in restraint desks in part of the day when they are outside the cells, and that's I can't remember the exact numbers, but I do think that's a dramatic improvement over where we were before on that. So that's all recognized, and we do appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to say the same thing. First of all, thank you for coming up and presenting to us and presenting very clearly all the progress, and I want to acknowledge that as well and congratulate you. I think there's been tremendous progress and enhanced supervision, you know, really moving the young people through the programming, doing the reviews, having the young people be a part of it, having excellent teachers and clinicians and all available to the young people. So I do really congratulate you on it, and I think that it's been a really key part of the young adult plan now that's become successful. I do feel that your use of restraints has dropped dramatically, and you have really made concerted efforts to do that. And I know the staff and the depth that runs enhanced supervision are so dedicated, so committed. I thought I did praise the correction officers earlier when I was talking about walking around RMDC and what terrific officers you have. There's no doubt about it. I feel that way about most. You know, we always have a couple not great people, no matter what the occupation is, but your officers are really dedicated, really committed to these young people, and it's very obvious when you go into the units in the depth. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning again. So I am here to present the 6-month variance renewal request for the use of enhanced supervision housing 1-16C1 for young adults 18 to 21 years old. Pursuant to Section 1-15 of the New York City Board of Corrections minimum standards, the department requests a 6-month renewal to the limited variance from BOC minimum standards 1-16, which requires that as January 1st, 2016, inmates aged 18 through 21, provided that sufficient resources are made available to the department for necessary staffing and implementation of necessary alternative program, be excluded from the placement in enhanced supervision housing, commonly known as ESH. The department seeks this variance renewal to be effective on February 17th, 2019, the date upon which the current variance is set to expire.
So we have, I think, 2 conditions to the, is there,
This one has a lot more
oh,
conditions.
sorry. Okay, first we need to have a motion on the
I'll move
vote on the requested variance, and then we get a
Second.
second there, and then we go to, the conditions. Is there a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
So I won't do a roll call on that. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Dr. Cohen, you oppose?
Yeah, I oppose that. I just want to say very quickly, I really appreciate the commissioner's comments. I believe that the board and the department have worked very effectively for many years on the subject, and all the accomplishments that you described are substantial, and none of them could have happened without the department's complete commitment to this. The board could have wanted a lot of things, but without the department's agreement and support, this couldn't have happened. I particularly want to comment, and I was not aware until you just made that statement about the elimination of restraint desk for the ESH 2s and 3s, and that's appropriate, and kudos to you and to the chief and all of the staff who have been working in that area. I still just like 7-day waivers are almost not needed. I think that ESH restraint chairs are not needed, and I think the department, and I hope the department considers further an expansion of a well-designed, secure capacity for the young adults, which will provide a safe environment for these 3 people going forward. But at the present time, I don't think the board should vote to endorse a policy of continuous restraints. Strongly feel that way.
I think that, Dr. Cohen, you and I have talked about this a lot, and I do think a lot of us share the notion that any kind of a restraint is something that we're extremely concerned about and would like to see eliminated. On the other hand, I do think that the department has made progress there, and I also think the department understands that we've not dropped the issue. Now that we've gotten it down to 3, we're not saying, okay, that's fine. We would continue to ask the department. I think they will do that. We've had these conversations to see if there are other alternatives, either different ways to produce the safety we're looking for in a context where people are not physically restrained. So it's progress, it's the right direction, but it's not something that we've given up on in terms of a goal. Other comments from the board?
Yeah, I'd just like to comment, the department has, with punitive segregation and going down so low, and not being able to separate a certain population, it's still very dangerous for the department, because you still have a lot of people that are in population that would have been in punitive segregation, and staff continually gets assaulted, and people continually get hurt. So I would like to see the department find another way of separating this very difficult population, but to not give them the tool, which I don't think is a great tool, but it is a tool, and to expect them to do it without any tools and say, okay, you have this very dangerous population, but handle it. I'd just like to say you really can't do that. And looking at how many people was in punitive segregation 5 years ago compared to now, that's a tremendous change. And the only tool they have right now is that restraint desk, which I think they should have other tools, because it's very dangerous population. There's a lot of them just walking around hurting staff, assaulting each other. So, I'm going to be in support for those restraint desks until the department, or the city can find other ways of making a separation.
Other comments from the board?
Yeah. I'd like to echo the remarks of my colleagues, and also express the hope that moving forward, the board will hear more about the alternatives being explored, and understand the disciplines being engaged to assist in exploring those alternatives. I would in future meetings, like to hear in some detail how the department continues to go about seeking alternatives in as systematic a manner as possible.
I think it's a good suggestion. Maybe next month we can devote some time specifically to that question, because
I echo that, but I would add that I think we as a board need to hold ourselves accountable to make sure that we're not just coming back here, every board meeting and renewing this variance without having seen additional progress with respect to the alternatives.
could not agree more. Absolutely. There are no further comments on this. Then there are a number of existing variances, and I'm assuming that the department, tell me if I'm wrong, are okay with those variances. If so, then I think
We're good.
yeah, I think the process is we would then approve the existing variances and then existing conditions, and then approve the variance with the conditions. So the first thing is a motion on the existing variances.
Also move that all the conditions that have been existing conditions on the variances, certainly from the last time, will remain without having to read each and every one of them. So because
Thank you
it's
for that.
available on the web. We've all got copies,
Right.
so that information is readily accessible.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there a roll call? And we're doing just the existing conditions. I'm going to do a roll call on that. Mr. Perino? Yes. Sherman?
Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Stafford?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I vote yes, so that carries. Now we will vote for the variance with the existing conditions. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Second? Okay, Mr. Perino?
Yes.
Yes, Sherman? Yeah.
Yes.
Dr. Stafford?
Yes.
Stanley? Yeah.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
I vote yes, so that the variance is approved and extended with the existing conditions. We now go, I think, Dr. Safir, you want to make a statement before we get back to the agenda?
Yes. Thinking that we should return to the first issue that we discussed, because I'm a bit troubled that all of us had things to say and worried about the law department's interpretation of the board's oversight of what is communicated between health and the Department of Corrections. I'm aware of over 35 years of the importance of that. It's not an issue of how many times has there been issues, what troubles there are. I think we need to be poised and in the right position to change that as we see it, as colleagues, as oversight. To take it away, and I think H&H is doing a great job, way better than what we saw, or I saw, previous to this. But these things can change. So I would urge us to make a statement together and vote on it and show our collective, because it seems to be collective, disagreement with the interpretation of the law department. I think we left it too much as Q&A and back and forth. I think we should formalize it. So it should be a strong statement disagreeing with the interpretation of the law department. We certainly expressed it to somebody, but that's not good enough for me.
So you know what I would recommend? I agree with Dr. Safir, and it really should be in the form of a resolution. Our general counsel is here, so I would ask her to start drafting such a resolution. I know we have some other agenda items on. We can move to those agenda items and then come back for this vote as quickly as you can draft a resolution and circulate it. Is that acceptable to you?
That's totally right.
So should the resolution first of all, confirm our disagreement with the law department's interpretation, and I think reaffirm our commitment to enforcing the minimum standard as it currently exists.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And our ability to condition that variance when we see appropriate.
Yes.
So those would be the items. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Safir. We'll come back to that in a second. Maybe not a second, but we'll come back to it. Okay. The last item on the, next item on the agenda is the PREA, the 2018 resolution of Board of Corrections. Yeah, we did. So, we're up to, yeah, no, he made it, but we're going to do a resolution and then, so we're now with you and PREA. Sorry. We're right here.
That was so fast. In September 2018, the board released an audit of DOC's investigations into sexual abuse allegations, analyzing a sample of 42 investigation reports from January 2010 to December 2017. That audit documented significant gaps in these investigations and violations of multiple provisions of the minimum standards. These included missing supervisor reviews, delayed investigations, reports that did not document whether the victim was interviewed in a confidential setting or why a crime scene was not established. The board unanimously passed a resolution requiring corrective action to improve the quality and timeliness of investigations. While the department did not respond to the resolution by the required deadline, Commissioner Brand wrote a letter on December 10th, which outlined recent efforts to improve compliance. Chair Cephas wrote a letter in response on January 3rd, reiterating the need for an updated corrective action plan that clearly articulates the goals and timelines for achieving those goals. On January 31st, the department submitted its corrective action plan. This is posted on our website, and while we need some more time to fully evaluate the results of that plan, the department's reported recent efforts are signs of very important progress. It is particularly encouraging that the department has met its goals of staffing up to 30 PREA investigators, adding supervisory staff, and increasing specialized training for that staff. There continue to be data and reporting challenges as required by minimum standard 540. The 540 data reports submitted to us are missing data elements required by the standards, and the board has been unable to reconcile the data we receive with the information presented in the department's public semi-annual reports. However, board and department staff are fully committed to working together to improve the department's reporting capacity, and we have started working closely together on 540 and data issues and have made progress already. This work will also be critical to ensuring the department can meet the requirements of recently passed City Council legislation requiring further reporting on sexual assault and harassment in the jails. Finally, as noted at last month's meeting, the board has scheduled a special hearing for April 23rd at 9 a.m., and that special hearing will be exclusively focused on the department's compliance with the board standards on sexual abuse and harassment. As always, we welcome comments, public comment at this meeting, and we'll accept written testimony before on this topic at any point, and we'll announce the location soon on our mailing list and website. And if we could just hear from the department on the updated corrective action plan, and the board would have an opportunity for questions and discussion, please. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Serena Townsend. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Investigation and Trials for the Department of Correction. I'm here to provide a status update regarding the department's PREA investigations unit, including progress made under our original corrective action plan and the amended plan the department submitted to the board at the end of January. In June 2018, the department committed to a corrective action plan in order to address the large PREA investigation backlog. The first part of the plan involves staffing. The goal was to increase the department's supervisory staff and upper management to 6 and 2, respectively, by September 2018 and to increase the number of investigators to 30 by January 2019. The department achieved those goals by the stated deadlines, and the PREA investigation unit is now fully staffed. In addition, the department also has 2 data analysts assigned to PREA investigations and a dedicated director and supervisory attorney from the department's Trials and Litigation Division assisting PREA investigators during the investigation process and handling the prosecution of PREA cases that are substantiated. The second feature of the original PREA corrective action plan was to address a 1,216 case backlog. Here, it is important to reiterate that despite the fact that those cases had remained in an open status past required deadlines, every single one of those cases was immediately addressed by investigators within the first 72 hours of the allegation, as mandated by the board minimum standards. Every alleged victim was interviewed and separated from any alleged identified perpetrator. Every alleged victim was offered mental and physical health services, and evidence was collected in a timely manner. All sexual abuse allegations were sent to the Department of Investigation for clearance within those first 72 hours. The cases remained open after that preliminary investigation, as I've discussed publicly before, because the investigators continued to receive and respond to new allegations. The investigators prioritized their responses to potential victims over administrative paperwork that needed to complete in order to close previous cases. Due to additional staff, we are now able to handle the closing of cases more efficiently. Our efforts at timely case closure began in April 2018, ahead of the original June corrective action plan. And we are pleased to report that since that time, the department's PREA investigators have closed over 1,000 cases. And we are on pace to eliminate that backlog before the end of February. In addition to the remarkable progress that has been made on the backlog, I would like to reiterate the department's steadfast commitment to PREA investigations. While working on this backlog, we continued to respond to all new allegations within 72 hours. Not only have the investigators addressed those newer allegations, they have also been able to close approximately 25 newer cases. In September 2018, the board conducted an audit of the department's closing memoranda for PREA investigations. Pursuant to the analysis of 42 investigative closing reports, the board made 8 recommendations for the department to implement in order to improve the quality of PREA investigations. Subsequently, in October 2018, the board passed a resolution requiring the department to produce a corrective action plan that addresses a commitment and timeline for the implementation of 1, the audit's 8 recommendations, 2, any other steps necessary to achieve compliance with the board's minimum standards sections 530 and 540, and 3, a computerized case management system for sexual assault and sexual harassment allegations. The department composed a new corrective action plan, which is public, at the end of January 2018. The department implemented all 8 audit recommendations soon after the audit results and well before the corrective action plan was composed. For example, the department retrained PREA staff in October 2018, amended its closing report in November 2018, and also in November 2018 ensured that all interviews of alleged victims be conducted in private, confidential settings. Thus, there is no timeline needed for implementation of those recommendations, except that to the extent that the recommendations require ongoing implementation, the department is committed to continue compliance. As for instituting any other steps the department deemed necessary to become compliant with the board's minimum standards, the department has sent PREA investigators out for additional external training, as I've discussed before, with the New York City Police Department Special Victims Unit, and to FEDI training, Forensic Experiential Trauma Interview Training. The department restructured, as also mentioned earlier, so that its trials and litigation department now also has a specialized PREA unit to handle all PREA cases in a vertical prosecution format. The PREA investigation unit also has an extra earlier layer of review that requires investigators to submit a report 5 business days after interviewing an alleged victim. Within 5 business days of that submission date, a supervisor is required to review that report. This forces investigators and supervisors to conduct earlier assessments of the viability of charges, consider additional follow-up, and review witness credibility before the investigation becomes stale. The department acknowledges and mirrors the board's desire for a computerized case management system. The current manual input system is inefficient and archaic. The department has analyzed the feasibility of creating such a system and expects to implement a system by the end of 2020. In the meantime, the department recently met with the board to determine best practices for Section 540 data collection compliance. The meeting was fruitful. The board identified additional categories of PREA information for the department to provide, and the department has agreed to track and supply that information to the board. In conclusion, the department's PREA investigation unit is at a turning point. We have completed a considerable amount of work, reducing a huge backlog without compromising safety, integrity, or quality. Our talented and dedicated staff members are committed to fair and timely investigations. Thank you. I'm prepared to discuss any questions that you may have regarding the department's continued compliance with PREA investigations.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Any board comment, questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Cohen.
Yes. Thank you, Serena. That's,
You're welcome.
It's really great to hear that, and tremendous progress, and I'm sure your staff has been working overtime to accomplish that. I have 4 questions which I would like answered in April. I don't know if you can, but I want to give you them right now. I'd like to know, since 2015, how many referrals to district attorneys came from the Department of Investigation through the PREA process?
From the Department of Investigation to the District Attorney's Office.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to know, similarly, the number of referrals that went to district attorney offices from ID and from the Department of Correction regarding PREA.
Okay. Since 2015,
Yes,
same.
yeah.
Okay.
The number of referrals to oath from DOI and DOCID beginning 2015 regarding PREA.
So just to clarify, we don't refer to oath. But what happens is after an investigation is complete within the Department of Correction, if the investigation is substantiated, our trials and litigation unit handles the prosecution of those cases at oath.
So maybe if you could provide some information.
How many have been prosecuted at oath?
That's consistent with how you look at it, and then the number of PREA-related indictments that have occurred annually since 2015.
Sure.
If I can just add, I think it would be good to see it not just in aggregate, but also broken down by each year.
Broken down by each year, you said? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Are there other comments?
Adding type of.
Anyone else?
Any
DC
other
Townsend,
comments
thank
from the
you.
board?
You're welcome.
Thank you. It's very, very
Thank you very much.
encouraging.
Thank you. Good work.
Thank you.
We need to get, do you know where the,
We're ready for you. One, two, three, four. Do you want to, maybe you should read it? That's great.
So this is the proposed draft resolution that Dr. Safier was introduced a minute ago.
I am Michelle Oversee, General Counsel to the Board, and I am going to read a proposed resolution. Whereas at the January 9th, 2019 public meeting, the Board voted to approve a 5-week renewal of the variance to healthcare minimum standard section 3-08C3 that prohibits the disclosure to the Department of Correction of specific diagnoses of people in custody. Whereas on February 8, 2019, the Law Department rendered an opinion concluding that the variance was unnecessary. Based on this opinion, CHS is not seeking a renewal of the variance. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board strongly disagrees with the Law Department's opinion because it ignores and misreads the plain meaning of Section 3-08C3. An interpretation that the Board, CHS, the Department of Correction, and the public at large have been operating under ever since the rule was first enacted 28 years ago, and which the rule's regulatory history confirms. It is further resolved that the healthcare standard, Section 3-08C3, remains in full force and effect, and that CHS must seek a variance to continue sharing with the Department of Correction specific diagnoses of injuries to people in custody. And it is further and finally resolved that the Board has the legal authority to impose the conditions that the Board has previously proposed.
Very good. Perfect. Good. Good job. So the motion is, no, we're going to vote on that. So we need a motion and then a second to vote on that, then I'll do a roll call. Is there a motion? Is there a second? Thank you, Dr. Safier. And so now we'll do a roll call. Mr. Perino? Yes. Dr. Safier? Sorry. Sherman? Yes. And I vote yes. So it carries. Thank you very much. Thank you, Michelle, for a great job in a very short period of time. Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Safier, for that good suggestion. So now we go to the public comment period. That motion carries. We'll now hear from the public. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. In addition to your oral testimony, we're happy to receive any written comments. And additionally, we take phone calls, letters, emails, or website forms, or drop-ins at our office if you care to make a public comment. The first speaker is Anna Arkin Gallagher from Brooklyn Defenders.
Good morning. My name is Anna Arkin Gallagher, and I'm a senior staff attorney in the Education Unit at Brooklyn Defender Services. I am here to speak about concerns we have regarding our clients' access to educational services while in DOC custody, and to echo some of the observations and concerns members of the board raised earlier today. We have long heard from our 18 to 21-year-old clients that it is difficult for them to access educational services on Rikers Island, stretching back to when most of them were detained at GMDC. The majority of our 18 to 21-year-old clients are now detained at RNDC, and they regularly report to us that, just as at GMDC, they have trouble getting to school. What we have heard from them recently conforms with what Judge Hamill and Dr. Cohen reported observing on their visits to RNDC and GRVC yesterday. We understand that correction officers are required to call for enrolled students in their housing units and transport them to the school floor. However, we often hear of breakdowns in the system. For instance, some clients report that officers don't call for them at all or pick them up so late in the day that they miss class time. The Daily News recently reported that students have even resorted to staging fights on their unit in order to get officers to show up so they can request to be brought to school. We've also heard reports of frequent, sometimes multiple-day lockdowns, where all students are denied access to school. Many of our young clients are also in other facilities that have no school services at all. DOC's position is that these young people can request a transfer to RNDC or another facility with this school, but many of them are concerned about transferring into an unknown environment. Others have requested transfers and have encountered delays in being moved, all the while missing school. I want to share with you the story of just one of our clients who has struggled to access school in DOC custody. Our client came to Rikers from the Horizon Juvenile Center. While at Horizon, he went to school nearly every day. Once at Rikers, he was not brought to school for over a month and a half. He was told that his security classification meant that only certain correction officers could bring him to school. But these officers either didn't come to get him or showed up too late. About a week ago, he happily reported he was brought to school for the first time. But a few days later, he called our office to tell us he wasn't brought to school again. By the time the officer showed up to bring him to school, the school day was almost over. Our client is eager to obtain his high school equivalency, but is consistently being denied that opportunity. DOC's problems assisting young people in accessing educational services are long-standing and well-documented. I appreciate the concern expressed earlier about these difficulties in getting young people to school. Our office is asking that the BOC look into these issues further to ensure that DOC allows the young people in their custody to access the education to which they are entitled. We plan to follow up with a letter with additional recommendations on this subject. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. The next speaker is Albert Craig.
It's amazing to me, right, that you have all these injuries, and then we brag about it's only 3 people in these secure desks, right? And everybody applauds it, and they say, oh, okay, that's great. It's inhumane. Meanwhile, these inmates are getting their faces cut, officers are getting beaten, they've been slashed, and we brag about how low the usage is. I mean, like, I don't see like there's a correlation. I don't think like I'm trying to figure out, does it make any sense that we had, 1 minute you saying this violence got to stop, and then the next minute you saying we only got 2 people assigned to these desks? Like, I don't understand what you people are doing here. Then the guy Thomas is my new hero. He showed that you really don't have any power or authority, that you are a bunch of elitists who sit here and allow people to get hurt. That blows my mind. You really have no authority, and you guys here need to man up and show a little courage. I mean, that was beautiful. That was the best thing I've seen since I've been coming to this thing. That he stood up here and he said, nah, do what you're gonna do. I'm not doing it. Now, meanwhile, officers are getting hurt, inmates are getting hurt, and we continually come here and ask for one issue, safety, and you act as if you care about safety, but you really don't. I don't know who bidding you're doing or who you work for, but you're not working in the best interest of anybody that has to go to Rikers Island. Then the guy who controls the teachers union or whatever, the board of the education, last month when that officer got a nose broke, his staff refused to take their posts. Go to school. So all of this is a front, it's a farce, it's a mockery, every other thing you want to say. This is ridiculous. Thomas, please, stop being cowards. You are so dishonorable. You sit up here and you've seen this man tell these people you have no authority, and their feelings got hurt because they are elitists. These people all make millions of dollars, the majority of them. They come here and they have no authority whatsoever, and you're letting them run this department while thousands of people are getting hurt. This is ridiculous. And you should be ashamed of yourself, you advocates. You sit here and these inmates are being slashed, like I said, and I ask you, why don't you ask them about the blending? Nothing. They're forcing people into these housing areas and they're getting stabbed and cut. But you people keep talking about stuff that blows my mind. You can't care about safety. You don't care about it. Stop acting. It's a poor job. Thank you, Thomas. I don't know your last name, but the elitist mentality, I am offended. I'm offended that I come here every month and I ask for some kind of safety, you to do anything about safety, and you totally ignore me. You ignore me and you're offended because he didn't want to listen to you. But I've been asking you to listen to me about safety, and you haven't. Thank you, Thomas, whatever your name. You're a godsend.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. So the next speaker is Elias Hussamadeen. Okay, next speaker is Kayla Simpson of Legal Aid.
Good morning. My name's Kayla Simpson. I'm a staff attorney at the Legal Aid Society's Prisoners' Rights Project. Good to see you all. I just want to say a few quick words about education. We are continually disturbed by what we hear about barriers to education at Rikers. Of course, we echo the words of our colleagues at Brooklyn Defender Services. Well said. I won't repeat a lot of what she said. We're hearing that enrollment is increasing, but attendance is decreasing. We hear powerful images like classrooms with teachers, but no students. We also hear reports from kids who tell us, like they told Judge Hamill, I think, that they want to go to school, but they're told they can't. That disturbs us deeply, especially with attendance rates being what they are. And honestly, barriers to education at Rikers are nothing new. Our office filed litigation about many of these very same problems more than 20 years ago. And during that time, DOC and DOE have been unable to fix them. Only last year, the Monitor and our Hanbury litigation found yet again that problems in access to school for young people frequently occur, depriving 18 and 21-year-olds their rights to both general and special education under federal law. And despite this reality, the city's response hasn't been to acknowledge the problem and fix it. Instead, earlier this year, as I think the director of our unit told you a few meetings ago, they moved to terminate the judgment. And while they did withdraw that motion to terminate, they're still fighting that litigation tooth and nail, and it disturbs us greatly. Instead of fighting plaintiffs' right to high school education, the city should finally take the steps to provide young people with the tools they need and to which they are entitled by law. And finally, I just want to say a quick word about PREA. Of course, we appreciate the update from Deputy Commissioner Townsend. Thank you. We still have serious concerns. We look forward to the meeting in April. We applaud you for scheduling it. And we also look forward to meeting with you, as I'm sure other stakeholders do, so that we can make sure that this gathering is as robust and productive as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next speaker says Ms. V from the Jail Action Coalition. Morning. Good morning.
Somebody left their phone. That don't take my time neither. My name is Minister Victoria. My name is Minister Dr. Victoria A. Phillips. Everybody just call me Ms. V. I'm from the Jails Action Coalition Mental Health Project. Very quickly, I would like to read a snippet off the DOC website concerning the city jails. Community engagement in this process is critical, as the path forward relies on continued support for this vision. The city is leading a public review process to engage people who are detained, staff, family, service providers, attorneys, advocates, community members, and neighborhood groups to ensure that the voices of New Yorkers from all communities can help shape the plan. Now, I read that because for the past 5-6 years, I've been a part of the advisory board for the adolescents and young adults, and I take my position on the board very seriously. And that's the language that DOC continues to come here every month and tell y'all when y'all ask them questions. Well, we're reaching out to advocates, we're reaching out to experts, we're reaching out to people to help us develop how to move forward. Yet last year, at the most critical time when Raise the Age was about to be implemented, the advisory board barely met. And then moving forward, under DC Michael Tolstead, excuse me if I didn't pronounce your name correctly, leadership, he has barely come to the meetings, and when he does come, he comes late. And for the January meeting, he also dropped the bomb on us. He said that there will no longer be food incentives given to the incarcerated individuals. Now, all advocates and all reports over the last few years have showed that that's been very helpful in keeping peace and motivating people to stay on track. And once I left that meeting, I started reaching out to my colleagues and people directly on the island, even uniformed officers, because I speak to them as well. And I was told that some people had got reports that evening snack had stopped in RNDC. Now, I was going to ask him about that for the meeting that we had February 5th, but he came late and left early. And I was not able to directly ask him about that. But I want to make a point, because in that meeting, he brought up changing the program and adopting a new style within the next couple of months. And I said, well, who asked you, or well, who did you go to for advisement on making these changes? It's not up for discussion. Now, he can tell me that in the meeting, but I wouldn't want to point it to you to next time he stands before you to actually have him tell you what's going on. And it makes me nervous, because if someone can just change things overnight like that, what else is he planning on changing? And he has a very nonchalant attitude towards us advocates, even making a statement as you people. And anyone, I do executive coaching, and anyone knows in a position of leadership, sitting at a board meeting, you don't separate yourself or give dismissive language as you people. So I'm very concerned with his attitude. I'm very concerned with the fact that he's bringing in people not a part of New York City culture to help make these changes. And I want to say it on the record, pay attention to DOC's staff and what's going to happen.
I didn't catch what you said. What did you say has been eliminated?
He was saying that the whole program that we developed over the last few years was going to be eliminated. He was putting a new program in. And when you know how I ask all questions on the board meetings, and when I started to ask him a question, he immediately shut it down. It's not up for discussion.
I just wanted to understand the substance. I thought you said before that they ended some sort of snack program.
Yes. So at the meeting, January 15th, the advisory board meeting, he came in and he basically told us that he ended all food incentives and he didn't see it as necessary, and that was it. So I wanted to know who helped him make that decision, because he ain't asked none of us in the advisory board meeting. And it's a room full of experts, it's a room full of advocates, attorneys, people that deal directly with those impacted in the situation. And we weren't privy to any of this conversation with him.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Can I just ask whether that's true? Has the snacks been eliminated? Because I know the young people really look forward to it, and they say they're always starving.
We have our commissary program currently in place. We also have during family events that there are snacks and food that are provided to participants in programs.
But there had been snacks available during the day. I remember before when the adolescents were there.
As a department, we're looking at the way in which food was utilized as a positive reinforcer and the amount of expenditures that were associated with that. There's also other positive reinforcers that are going to be built in to the young adult plan that are more skill-based than just food-based.
The last speaker is Kelly Grace Price.
Good morning. I'm Kelly Grace Price, and this is Frank Sinatra. I want to report a little bit of progress in my life to you. As you know, I have been fighting the scourge of rape and sexual assault since the day I walked home barefoot from Rikers Island in 2011. I've also been trying to restore myself to the status I enjoyed before my malicious prosecutions, unlawful imprisonment, and wrongful arrests. I've had a bit of progress on some of these fronts. Recently, the historical law firm Cravath, Swain & Moore picked up my litigation against the city, to which I am delighted after fighting this battle all by myself. But I'm still worried because, as you know, one of my goals is to end the rape crisis on Rikers, and we've really literally come no closer to that goal than we were when I started this advocacy in 2013 in front of the Board of Correction. That's as long as I've been attending these meetings. So I want to address, with my remaining 2 minutes, the remediation recommendations that the board asked the department to respond to in October. I also want to very quickly note that I heard Ms. Townsend, and thank you for your report today, Ms. Townsend. I want to tell you how much I love you as a redhead, by the way. And I also wanted to clarify, you mentioned that you're looking forward to clearing out the 1,216 case backlog that the department currently has, but according to the numbers that I've compiled by listening to every testimony, Frank, and reading every report.
He can get his 3 minutes in a minute.
Ever produced by the department. Over the last 12 years, we have 3,017 complaints of rape, sexual assault, sexual harassment, or abuse, however, which way you define them. And we have literally 2,800 of them that are still open. And so these numbers are, I'm sure they have something to do with what's in the PREA bucket, what's not in the PREA bucket, but we need these things clarified before we just get the report in April or in March when it's due from the department. I also, and I'll submit my written testimony in detail, but I feel like the department's response to your remediation plan is wholly inadequate. For instance, the first that you ask is for retraining, and the department asserts that it has retrained, it has trained people, but when you boil down into exactly what has been done, we don't know how many people have been sent. By the way, the NYPD isn't exactly the greatest bastion of sexual assault investigations, so I would be very leery of taking on any training that SVU department imparts to the DOC. But we don't know how many people have been sent to the FEDI trainings. We don't even know how many people have watched the video that the department is using in lieu of real solid training. Why is the department using NYC videos to train? In 2016, now interns sat here and went over dozens of different types of training. I don't think we should just be relying on them, those two specific forms. As always, I didn't get a chance to get everything in, but it will be submitted in my written testimony, and I thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you very much. So this concludes our meeting. Our next meeting is March 12th, 2019, back in this room. Thank you very much.
I want to talk to you, just let you know my brother passed. Yeah. He